know when you're going to get a question that you don't know the answer to. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We have some special guests. We have our county executive here, just kissed Senator Nicole Poore in the back of the room. Senator Poore, I know, has to go to an event at 6:45, I think she said. We have Representative Minor Brown. This is your district. It is.
I just went back and just saw everybody that's here from your staff. I was like, wow.
Well, like I said, you never know when you're going to get a question. We have the current mayor for another week, and the next mayor of Newcastle, Mayor Mike Caranta, and Mayor Bill Blast. I assume Bill was just elected? Just elected Saturday, so he's brand new. Welcome. We have, as I said, a number of members of the cabinet here. In case we have a big snowstorm, we have members of our Delaware National Guard over with us. Please help me thank these men and women who've done a tremendous job. I want to tell you, we would not have survived the pandemic. Some would argue we didn't, but without our Army and Air National Guard, whatever we needed to get done, they did, including really the kind of the most trying part in January of 2022, when most of our hospital beds were filled. We sent out Army and Air National Guardsmen and women to our hospitals. They were a tremendous resource for the nurses that were already working there. And we trained up probably 100 or so and deployed to long-term care facilities, relieving the staffs there that were overworked. So they just were amazing throughout. Testing, vaccinations, you name it, they were there when we needed the Delaware Army and Air National Guard. General can't be with us tonight. He lives downstate, so I imagine maybe he's in D.C. Okay, well. So welcome to our first town hall meeting on this year's budget. It is budget time in the General Assembly, and I'll explain kind of at a very high level the proposal that we made in January, some of the highlights of it. Hopefully you'll have questions there. If you're not kind of a budget person, it can get a little boring. As I look around the room, I see folks that are here for other purposes, and we'll try to answer their questions as well, although we won't get bogged down with any one subject or another. We can have, and we have, we've done these town hall meetings. Well, we didn't do them during the pandemic, obviously, but going back several years when I was first elected, we had a big budget deficit, if you remember, and so we wanted folks to understand what we were trying to do, and we had a lot of people come out who wanted to talk about the budget, but also wanted to talk about other things. You know, somebody once said, I think it was the president of our United States used to say, "Don't tell me what your priorities are, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what your priorities are." And it really is a good way of thinking about how governments spend your tax dollars, and how we tonight spend your tax dollars here in the state of Delaware, what our priorities are, and you'll see in a few minutes where we're putting an emphasis this particular year. We're in a much better place financially than we were when I was first elected 6.5 years ago, when we were facing almost, I guess, a $400 million deficit when the budget first went in. It got better as the spring went on, as revenue estimates increased, and we'll talk a little bit about how we determine how much revenue, how much tax revenue we have to make, to put the budget together. Those revenues for this year are declining, if you're paying attention to that, and that creates a problem. The budget that I submitted in January, which is required to be a balanced budget, is now about $100 million out of balance for two reasons. One is our revenue estimates have gone down. A committee referred to as the Delaware Economic and Financial Committee is empowered and has been since Pete DuPont was governor and formed the DFAC for the first time, gosh, 50 years ago or more. We've been using those estimates to create the budget. The estimates are made by business leaders, academics from the University of Delaware, Delaware State, people in various business sectors across the state. In addition, our state finance people and accountants who collect the money and have the estimates, and we get great help from economics professors at the University of Delaware. So way back in the mid-1970s, the state was in a real problem. I don't see anybody in this room who was around in 1976 or thereabouts, maybe one with the Phillies hat on back there. But when Pete first got in, if you remember, there was a big farmers' bank crisis, and the farmers' bank had a big fiscal problem, and the state had all of its receipts was required to have all its receipts, all its revenue in the farmers' bank, which was virtually insolvent. So Governor DuPont, good morning, or afternoon, evening, I'll catch up to you. He presented his budget based on revenue estimates that he and his people came up with. The legislature changed those estimates based on, I guess, the staff recommendations that they had and passed their own budget. The governor vetoed that budget because the revenues weren't right in his mind, in the mind of his advisors. The legislature overrode his veto, and so we had the budget that the legislature passed with revenue estimates that weren't any good. And so since then, they created the Delaware Economic and Financial Advisory Council, which created by then Governor Comp, and every DuPont and every governor since then has used those estimates to create the budget. That's really, really important, because if you're not budgeting to a revenue number, you can get everything out of whack. Legislators tend to have bigger appetites than we have revenue, as do advocates and the people. They have those appetites because of the people that they work for. It's not something that they do on their own. And so getting the revenue numbers right from the beginning is really important. We have those numbers from DFAC, but as I said, they will have a number of meetings, 2 or 3 left, I guess. Jeffrey, 2 left. So that after that second meeting left, we'll have a final number which the budget has to be based on. One of the other things that Governor DuPont, 2 of the other things, let's see if we can get some slides up here and you can take a look at. So here's where we are. The cabinet members, many of whom are standing in the back of the room, they've put together their budget, submitted it to the budget office. The Delaware Economic and Financial Advisory Council has put together its first couple sets of revenue projections. The ones that just were approved a couple weeks ago reduced the estimate that my budget in January was based on by about $35 million. So that means we're $35 million out of balance now. We've got something going on with Medicaid healthcare spending, where the federal government is taking some money away that they provided to states during the pandemic, and estimating the effect of that on our state has been very difficult in trying, and it's going to cost us money. So when you include cost estimates that were in the original budget that now are being revised upward, we're looking at about an imbalance of $100 million, and so that's what the Joint Finance Committee and the bond bill committees are doing now. From February to May, they're in their Easter break now, but a week or 2 ago they had their JFC break where they met and looked over the budget that I presented. They do have the new revenue projections. They do not have the new cost estimates that I mentioned. By June 30th, we'll have a final budget bill and bond bill that hopefully we're required to have it by June 30th. The next slide should give you a schematic about the very high level how this happens and how we've changed it. You heard me talk about the rainy day fund. It's 5% of total revenues, which right now is just something short of $6 billion. So it's about $300 million, if you can do the math really quickly. So at the beginning of the year, we're required now by the Constitution, it was a constitutional amendment, to set aside 5% of what those expected revenues to be. And the legislature can only appropriate, so all the work they're doing with the Joint Finance Committee now, they can only appropriate at 98% of whatever the DFAC number gets to be, right? So if the DFAC number is $100 million, they can only appropriate $98 million. And then you can extend that to the bigger numbers. We're talking now about, like I said, revenue around $6 billion. So that's the way the budget has been put together since Pete DuPont in the mid-1970s, 1980. Every governor since then has followed it. We changed it with a little bit with a executive order just after I took office, because what the 98% rule allowed the General Assembly to do, and the governor for that matter, is to appropriate into a revenue bubble. What we found over the last 50 years is state revenue goes up and down. And if you think about it, we'll show it to you in a diagram in a minute. If you have an extraordinary revenue year, that means the legislature can appropriate 98% of whatever that number is. Do you have that graph? I don't think it's next. It's probably the one after. There it is. So what you want to do is you want to have your revenue match your budget, right? Then you have a balanced budget. You can see the last 2 years we've had an extraordinary increase in our revenue coming out of the pandemic. Lots of economic activity. Lots of economic activity that created new corporations that pay corporate franchise fees that come into the state coffers. And so you can see this number is 28% revenue growth. Well, under the old rules, prior to my executive order, the legislature could have appropriated into like 98%, somewhere here. Instead, we created a process where the Delaware Economic and Financial Advisory Committee, what I talked about earlier, establishing the revenue estimate, also creates a spending target. So it's population plus inflation. It's a formula that we developed that gives the administration, and, well, the legislature hasn't adopted that yet, but they follow it, gives us a target for what our operating budget can be. So you can see we were under the revenue growth number in FY19. When the pandemic hit, we stayed steady on the operating budget growth. We used some of the surplus from the prior year. That revenue dropped because the economy kind of went into the tank and then accelerated out of the pandemic, and we kept our spending at an even level. What you would see if we carried this out based on the current revenue estimate from DFAC is something that's probably fairly flat across here. And the question is going to be, what happens out here in FY25, 26? And of course, if we knew that, we could make a lot of money, but we don't. So instead, we're cautious. Could you go back to the graph again? So we try to, and this is pretty representative of the way it's been over the past 30 years. When I was the Secretary of Finance for then Governor Tom Carper, we had some extraordinary revenue years. And we cut taxes just about every year of the 4 years that I was Secretary of Finance. But after that, the economy took a pretty deep decline and our revenues went down with it. And we were in a position where we had to raise taxes up again because we had overreached there. So trying to keep a steady course on your spending and generate revenue that's hopefully above above your budget growth line. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Just so before we go to the next part, we're just going to talk generally about the priorities that are in the budget, some of the challenge that we face in state government, which aren't unlike challenges that anybody running the business right now faces, and that is, where are you going to get the workers? Right now, we've got nationally, the last numbers I saw, about 13 million job openings and only 8 million people looking for work. That's a problem. It's a lot better than the opposite. In all my years in public service, it's always been the opposite, where we haven't had enough jobs for the people looking for work. But it's still a problem. And one of the problems is it drives up wages because people can move from one employer to the next. And we're experiencing the same thing in state government. We have a couple thousand. I'm looking at Claire DeMattias, a daughter of Newcastle, actually, right, who's now our Secretary of Human Resources. We have a couple thousand vacancies, would you say? A couple thousand vacancies. And if you talk to any employer in the state of Delaware, they would tell you the same thing. And so what that has meant is that the competition means that you've got to pay more to attract people to the jobs that are available, and we're seeing that. You can see it if you walk up to the front door of a Wawa. They have a notice on the front that they're looking for people, and they'll pay $15 an hour, and they'll give you education benefits and all of the rest of it. So the next slide talks about, so I'm just talking about, we have competitive pay raises for state employees, especially classroom teachers. We made a big move to pay our teachers more because we're competing, and we're in intense competition with New Jersey, with Maryland, with Pennsylvania. You know, a lot of the students who are in education at the University of Delaware, Delaware State University, they're from these other states. And so we compete when they graduate as to whether they're going to come here and work in the Colonial School District or somewhere in our state or go back to New Jersey. Maryland just a couple years ago increased their starting salaries to $60,000 a year for a starting teacher, and we're trying to be competitive with that. So we had a big movement there. We also, 9% increase for classroom teachers. We also increased the salary of state employees from the midpoint down, so the lower paid employees, to kind of pick them up. We've been arguing and actually implementing a $15 minimum wage. Well, we had some state employees that weren't making that kind of money, and so we've raised that for those employees as well. Both of those things cost money, and they're the biggest kind of budget drivers. We also have other initiatives to in our middle schools and high schools, and also in our workforce to encourage people to move to job openings that are available. One of the priorities for our administration has been opportunity funding, which is additional funding to schools and school districts with lower income students and English learners, and we moved that number up. And then a lot of one-time money into these priorities. Affordable housing, which is a big challenge in our state right now, something that became really challenging during the pandemic, as people had less income during that period of time and there were less units available. Clean water, everybody turns on their spigot every day and expects to get clean water. I just spent an economic development tour in India. It is not a given there in India, either clean water or clean air. We certainly take that for granted. They have 1.4 billion people there, and they don't have clean water, and their air is terrible. Economic development and infrastructure are always things that we want to invest in so that we can grow our economy, create jobs. Very difficult when you don't have a lot of people looking for work, but that economic activity enables our budget to grow and for us to make these investments that we're talking about. So the biggest priority, of course, then is investing in our public schools. I mentioned the 9% raise for classroom teachers, 3% raise for other public ed workers, the $15 million in addition to money that we already had in the budget for opportunity funding, and then a special initiative in the city of Wilmington for our Wilmington Learning Collaborative. One of the things that is probably our biggest challenge these days is to attract businesses to our state, and the competition that we have with states around us in the region. Again, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland. So we're always looking to keep our taxes so that there's not a disincentive for moving to Delaware. We tend to have income taxes that are a little bit higher than in Pennsylvania, but their property taxes are 3 times what you pay here in Delaware. Our taxes are incredibly low in our region and across the country, and it's one of the reasons we see such a tremendous influx of retirees and senior citizens, mostly to the beaches in the lower part of our state, because the property taxes they pay are, you know, you could have a huge house and pay $2,000, $2,500. They pay $25,000 for that kind of property in Maryland or more, Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So we're always thinking about what are the kinds of things that we need to do to keep Delaware competitive. And that's the lens through which I always look at tax proposals that we have, cuts or increases. Investments that we make in our schools are incredibly important. Our investments in higher education probably more important today than any time certainly in my memory, because think about the Star Campus, which is where the old Chrysler plant used to be. So starting in the 1950s, that plant was built to construct tanks for the Korean War. And then after the war, they made for years for Chrysler automobiles. Well, it closed probably 15 years ago. The buildings were taken down, but there are more people working at the Star Campus there today than were working there when Chrysler had very different jobs for sure. Those jobs that Chrysler provided were blue-collar jobs, paid a lot, enabled people to support their families with a modest educational background. These are very high-tech level type jobs, both for the University of Delaware and the companies that have set up operations there. And so that's the focus that we have in terms of the type of employment that we're looking for, and what our children, the kids that are in school now, what the bar that they have to meet educationally to be able to take those jobs. So investing in state employees, increasing wages, I talked about, and also looking at where state employees work. Buildings are in pretty bad shape, trying to make investments, capital investments now when we have a lot of extra one-time money. When you have the enormous growth in revenue that spikes up, but you know it's going to settle down and not be sustainable in the future, you want to use that extra revenue on one-time expenses because you know it's not sustainable in the future. So investing at our courthouses, I see our Chief Justice in the back of the room, a resident of Newcastle. You can put your hands together for our Chief Justice if you like. We've invested probably close to $200 million or more. No, it's got to be more than that. He's shaking his head. A lot of money in new courthouses in Kent County and Sussex County, which were badly needed. Early childhood education is a really a high priority. The funding that goes in the early childhood education now comes primarily from a program from the federal level that's referred to as purchase of care. And it's an outgrowth of welfare reform in the early 1990s when Bill Clinton was president, where they changed the system that provided an endless supply of direct payments to what they call temporary assistance for needy family, but it also enables those folks who are forced to go back to work after a period of time to spend money for their children in daycare. So that workforce support program is something that we're now trying to refocus a little bit on early learning for our youngest children in our state. We know the science today tells us that the earlier you get to these children, the better off you have in helping them form their brains as they need to be successful in life. So we've worked on expanding the programs we have for purchase of care in our early childhood assistance program. We're in the process of working with members of the General Assembly to rethink the way we fund early education in our state. It's really a top priority. The system that we currently have, in my view, doesn't work effectively, and we need to do a better job so that we can maximize these investments. So the next slide should talk about our commitments to our waterways and shorelines. One of the questions that may come up may be about our proposals around electric vehicles and reducing carbon emissions into the atmosphere, which is a priority for us. On the other side, we know that we have to invest in coastal resiliency because global warming is creating sea rise, which is Delaware being the lowest lying state, can have a real impact, negative impact on our state. Those of you who live in Newcastle can relate to that, I think, because you're at a pretty low sea level here. So we have significant investments in shoreline resiliency and open space and clean water. We are receiving, and I'll show you those numbers in a minute, significant resources from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan, lots of investments in water and wastewater infrastructure, capital infrastructure like our bridges and highways. Our Secretary of Transportation is in the back. Here, these are some of the investments we're making in our economic development program, a strategic fund. Those are our incentives that we use to try to attract businesses to our state. We've actually had considerable success there. We were able to attract a biopharmaceutical manufacturing plant to just outside of Middletown, which is about $500 million of investment and about 500 new employees there, with the expectation that they'll grow by another 500. We have $10 million in the budget to provide to make a particular employment center site ready to go. That's usually spent on road infrastructure for a site. And one of the things that we're learning, we've got these scientists on the STAR campus at the University of Delaware working on new innovation and companies that they want to start. Well, when they move out of the university, they need a place that has more lab space to do the work that they're involved in. And so we've got some money to help there. Some of that money recently has been used to help Prelude Therapeutics, which is a pharmaceutical company that came out of UD that's moving to the Chestnut Run facility. How many know where the Chestnut Run facility is on 141? So that used to be exclusively a DuPont facility, but now it's a multi-tenant facility, including where Prelude Therapeutics is going to move their new offices to and expand their employment there. And of course, the transportation side as well. I mentioned before that housing being such a huge priority. This $100 million, most of that, or a significant portion of that, is money coming from the federal government, from the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and we're using it for these programs that in different ways address the affordable housing challenge that we have in our state. So these are the biggest numbers that we've ever had in affordable housing in Delaware. So here's a few things about this surrounding area. There's a big $6 million grant to work on Route 9. And then we have some electric charging stations that are planned to be in this area. We do have our Secretary of Transportation here if you have any questions about that Route 9 project. All right, so I mentioned the federal resources that have been coming to Delaware since the pandemic. We would not have been able to get through it without the support originally through CARES Act funding. It was just short of $1 billion. It essentially went to businesses to help them keep people working, to keep people getting paid when they weren't working, to reestablish our unemployment fund, because if we hadn't had those resources to do that, we would have had to raise the taxes on businesses for those unemployment funds. That's where the unemployment funds come from in the first place. They're not from the taxes that we pay. They're from unemployment taxes that employers pay. So here are the big buckets with the American Rescue Plan. There's also some of the bipartisan infrastructure bill here. So a lot of broadband extension and technology, state capital projects. Broadband is mostly for mid-Delaware, Kent County, and Sussex County, western Sussex County. I mentioned in the last slide the investments in housing development and emergency housing. We supported the hospitals and healthcare in a significant way during the pandemic. Probably around $50 million or so went to shore up the hospitals, because obviously if people, if they had their elective surgeries shut down, they weren't making that money from those procedures, and so we had to support those there. We have, we're set aside in the ARPA funding about $112 million for capital projects for nonprofits. Our request has been in for quite some time. This $72 million is still pending, and the rest of that money to take you up to $112 million was for libraries, and those monies have already moved. I'm seeing Claire shake her head. She was spearheading that at that time. I mentioned how important higher education is. We invested $105 million in University of Delaware, Delaware State University, and Delaware Tech. In the University of Delaware itself, $41 million went to upgrade one of their best labs for chemical engineers and other scientists. The total building, I think, cost $150 million, something like that. $50 million on COVID-19 response. I talked a little bit about workforce development and pathways. Pathways are programs in our public high schools to connect students with employment opportunities in the workforce. And then I mentioned the $40 million for Delaware libraries. All right. Hello? Is that it? Where's my... Oh, okay. You did switch it on me. Just looked alike. So I mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Here are the big numbers there. Roads and bridges, $500 million. Those programs were essentially existing programs that we had that were just plussed up. Is that right? Secretary Majeski's shaking her hand. So there's going to be a lot of construction going on out there. A lot of people, putting a lot of people to work, which is a good thing, provided that folks can find those workers given the shortage there. Again, significant resources in drinking water and wastewater facilities, ports and waterways, climate resilience, clean energy and electric vehicle infrastructure, public transit, and highway safety. All right, that's it. We had, usually I have a slide with all the numbers on it. We decided to save you that tonight so that you didn't get too focused on small print and small numbers. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. As I said, I have a number of members of my cabinet here that might be able to address questions that are not specific to the budget. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I know with Jack Markell there was a lot of money set aside for... Yeah, hi. I know with the previous governor there was a lot of money set aside for bikeways. I'm interested in where that might fall in the categories in your infrastructure.
Yeah, they're mostly embedded in the transportation projects. In fact, I saw one just today where they were doing a big $250 million plus project at 896 and I-95. And there's a bikeway walkway that would go from the UD side of that big interchange all the way through to the other side on your way to Glasgow, et cetera. Right now, you can't get there from here. So that's a good example. There are a number of specific trails that people are advocating for, our friends in the General Assembly. One is one that connects the Jack Markell Trail to Newport. It's a big one focus. There's a big, I don't know if you add anything to that, Secretary Majewski, on the bikeways and
Yeah,
the
do you know
walkways?
how much money is set aside for that?
Well, as I said, I just mentioned the $250 million project, so some portion of that is going to the bikeway I just referred to.
Yeah, so all of our capital projects will incorporate a bike component to it. So that's kind of embedded into the larger capital programs. But then in addition to that, we average around between $7 to $10 million specifically for the Trails and Pathways program. So investments to continue to expand the Jack Markell Trail. We've got investments that we're making here in Newcastle to expand that. Working with our partners and other local governments to work on the Newport Trail. We're going to hopefully finish the Georgetown to Lewis Trail down in Sussex County. So things of that nature, about 7 to 10 million independently of the capital programs.
They're actually better when they're in those bigger projects because they don't become a target when we, remember the slide I showed where our revenue went way down? You don't want to be a target, and those days come, that's for sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to say congratulations to all the great things that you have accomplished in the state of Delaware. I've been in Delaware going on 30 years. When I came over here, my husband and I, who's now deceased, there were more jobs than people. And I've worked 26 years on a part-time job and 37 at my daytime job, which was in Philadelphia. And I just retired. Woohoo! Thank you. For medical reasons, of course, but I thank God that I'm alive. Secondly, what I would like to see in Delaware when I first arrived, the cleanliness. God, I miss it. It is so much debris.
A woman after my own heart.
I miss it.
Oh, you miss the clean.
The cleanliness
Well, we're working
in
on it.
Delaware. There was no debris nowhere, and I really respected that. And
We,
so I like
we
to,
are working on that in a big way.
yes.
We have signs that we've been putting up. I've been out there personally with different crews. We've established crews that have done it. Secretary Majewski sends me a report every couple weeks, how many big bags. But it's easy. It should be easy. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Like, don't roll down your window at the stop sign and throw your fast food bag out the window. And it just happens, drives me crazy, but we are on it. Do this. Drive up I-95 and cross over into Pennsylvania, and you can tell the difference.
Oh, my God.
We are so much better. We still have a long way to go, but we're so much better than that.
Yes. I believe that it's the new residents that's coming to Delaware that each...
We blame it. I'll blame it on the new. It's nobody in this room, I can tell you that.
My suggestion is send everyone a letter. Get them involved. Give them awareness. No littering. The state won't tolerate it.
I agree 100%.
Among new employment, because it's needed. And also the homeless, and I friends on no one, because everyone needs help. I want to also congratulate you on the COVID. I don't know what I would have done without you. Because of my medical conditions, which led me to be out on sick benefits, your department truly stepped in and helped out. That COVID was a dangerous, mystical something in the air. And if you did not have the funds to work, to continue to work, you would be out in the street.
Well, I'll tell you this. We're lucky that we live in Delaware.
Your
Because
operation was
one of the
beautiful.
reasons that we were able to do things well, in my opinion, was because we were able to get every sector, restaurants, bars, construction, chambers of commerce, the small towns and cities, you name it, the judiciary, on a phone call to explain what we were doing, to ask them to do what they needed to do. And it was just a lot easier. I can't imagine what it was like in some of my colleagues. And I stayed in pretty close connection with Governor Murphy in New Jersey, Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, and Governor Hogan. We had to try to coordinate, particularly here, because we had so many cross-boundary type things that were going on. I think there was a right there.
Governor Carney, welcome back to Newcastle.
It's good to be here.
My name is Dennis Young, and I'm a retired physician living in Newcastle. And I understand that healthcare spending is a significant problem for the budget.
Huge problem.
In Delaware and other states, too. But respectfully, I would ask you, what is the justification for Dover, for the state, for you, trying to mandate that retirees who used to work for the state of Delaware would be forced to give up their regular Medicare and accept Medicare Advantage for their health care, which is a significant reduction in coverage and threatens access to treatment for so many retirees?
Well, obviously, we don't see it that way, that it's not a significant reduction. Ours was an arrangement that we developed specifically for the state of Delaware, not an off-the-shelf Medicare Advantage type program. And so it was intended to provide for state employee retirees basically the same approach to health care that an active employee like the governor and others have, where it's a system, it's more of a managed care system than a fee-for-service system. The simple reality is that the state spends close to $150 million a year on retiree health, and it's been growing at a rate that's greater than our revenue growth, it's greater than the growth in the economy, and therefore you're getting further and further behind. So we've got to find a way to manage that. We thought that this Medicare Advantage was a way to do that. I think there was a lot of misinformation out there about how it would work, and I get that. People are used to the way they receive their health care. And they don't want to have to get a pre-authorization, which is what everybody else has to do. And so we were just trying to think about how to keep healthcare cost inflation for retirees at a level that is manageable given everything else that we're required to do. One of the reasons that we're not able to give I'd rather give retirees an increase in their paycheck, their retirement paycheck, than in their health care, but you've got to do both. Yeah, I know you do. You and I have talked about it, and I know your feelings about it. And you know, it's something that we can disagree on. What we need to agree on is that there's a problem and a challenge, and that healthcare at whatever level is not free, and it's going up at a rate greater than the growth of our economy, which means increasingly it's going to be more difficult for taxpayers in this case, or business people.
But can we agree that it's immoral to restrict patients' access to care?
We're not doing that. We would never propose to do that.
Managed care is...
No, it's not. So if we're not going to be able to agree that managed care is not restricting people from appropriate health care, then we're not going to get anywhere. Managed care is what every state employee, essentially, not every, but just about every state employee has. That's the fact. That's just the simple fact. What's that?
Yes, good evening, one and all. And we did talk at the beginning before you got up to speak, Governor. And I did meet you, as I told you, at the Darley House when you dedicated...
My hometown.
Yeah, the new train station when you dedicated that. I originally was going to ask about the EV as we started to discuss before, but there's been so much moss growing from rolling from the questions that have already been asked. And like I said, I moved from New Jersey about 4.5 years ago. I was a paramedic for 36 years in the Atlantic Cape May County and Camden venue. Pretty rough neighborhoods, okay. I'm also still a board certified and licensed, only in Delaware now, but I was licensed in New Jersey as a physician assistant, so I could respect the physician there. I'm going to start with one of the questions, trash. Oh my God. My wife and I were picking up trash along Darley Road, and we're right behind the Ascension Church, and oh my gosh, we have trash and needles and baggies. Okay, we'll get to that. The second thing was retirees. Yes, I am a senior. I get my Tuesday deduction at Goodwill when I go to shop. But the bottom line is, our council person there, when I brought it up, the factor that, and I'm an RD7, and I love Larry. Larry's a great guy. We get along very, very well. Mr. Lambert is wonderful. He has picked up a lot of slack up there that goes undone. I was told when I asked about the senior tax break for schools, which I believe you get $200 off on your taxes.
I think it's 4.
Well, if it's 4, then it's even better than what I'm going to say. I was told by the councilman, well, you moved from New Jersey and you're paying less taxes than you did in New Jersey, except that. I'm sorry, from a politician, that is not a good answer, and that's why I ran against him in 2020. Going to do it again, but nevertheless.
Do you have a question behind all that?
Yeah, going with the physician, I'm going to go to the drug problem. In New Jersey, they did go through a pilot program that was established by a physician, director of emergency medicine at Cooper, where paramedics, when they come to a scene, and if it's an overdose, they will give Narcan, obviously. But also in New Jersey, they will initiate a Suboxone on the approval of the patient and also the entrance into an addiction program. I have talked to Newcastle County paramedic supervisor and others who said they would be very interested in this, but the state wouldn't go for it. I think it's a good stepping stone down. I'm wondering if you've heard of that program?
No, I have not. I know we have a problem with overdoses. The rate of overdose is much higher than many states in the country. We've got a group that's been working on it. I know your representative and senators are working on it. I think we need better systems to deal with some of the root problems and challenges there. And as I said, there's a group that the Lieutenant Governor chairs that's been working on a number of these ideas. I don't think we've turned the corner yet, unfortunately, but it's a sad reality.
I think it's a good thing, if somebody's overdosed, it's a good point in time to say this might be a great time to change your life. And God only knows I've given enough Narcan in my lifetime, 36 years, to float a boat.
But that's what we hope. And, we're trying to, at those touch points, when somebody whose life is saved by a Narcan hit, then, that's an opportunity.
Let's move them along.
Yeah, that's an opportunity. But
forward.
That they usually just get up and leave.
I know. I've had repeat customers when I was paramedicing. I know that.
Do you have one more question? Because we got other folks
I'm
here.
going to go with that. What I was going to start with
you and I can talk afterwards.
Yeah, we will do that. Okay. I do thank you much, and I appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yes, good afternoon or evening, everyone. I want to first thank you for having this forum, and I'm really excited to hear that it's on economics. Before I share my questions, I did have a question for clarification. I think I heard you reference that there was going to be a new pharmaceutical company in Middletown?
Yes.
Okay.
Pharmaceutical manufacturing company. They make the ingredients for other companies that put the final product together.
What final products do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but there's a whole range of different things.
Okay. So I'd like to speak as a patient. I've heard the medical professionals speak. I'd like to speak to you as a patient. And I want to thank you for the medical cannabis, your support with medical cannabis, because I am a patient of that. Unwillingly, I had to become one after a car accident a decade ago, where my physicians and everyone that we are historically taught to listen to prescribed opioids, pain medicine, and everything else that wound up being a cumulative downturn in my health care. Because of what I was told, I was then diagnosed with high blood pressure, diabetes, and several other systemic things that are a direct result of the pharmacies and the drugs, and that is a problem that we need to fix in our country, let alone in Delaware. So we have a proposal for medical, not just medical, but also regulation and cannabis legislation. And what I want to say about that is right now, if I was sick and I was following my doctor's orders and everyone else here in the system that is the systemic system that's in place, I could send my 24-year-old child or my husband to Rite Aid to pick up those medicines. But when I'm sick now and I have a problem, I cannot send anyone to pick up my medicine from the medical dispensary for which you support. So we do know that there is benefit to marijuana, cannabis, because you support that, but we're at a crossroads when it comes to legalization, and we'd like to get over that crossroad. As you know, over 70% of your constituents are looking for this legalization. And you're speaking about economics, and you're speaking about remaining competitive with your neighboring states. And as you know, New Jersey legalized this summer, Maryland just legalized, and Pennsylvania is right behind us. So my question to you is, when are you going to make the first state, not the last state, but the 22nd state, and help us get this done?
Yeah, you probably know that. I can tell that there are a number of people who support that in the room, by the way. You know, I'm sure, that I don't support it, and that the last time they were sent to my desk, or at least one of them, I vetoed it because I just don't think it's good mostly for young people, and I don't think it's good for our competitiveness. Now, reasonable people can disagree on that. I do support the medical marijuana program. You also probably know that I have the bill on my desk right now as we speak. I'm not going to make any news tonight, but I listen to all my constituents. I'm not sure I would buy those numbers, but that's not really, I don't make my decisions based on poll numbers, but there are a lot of people. Look, one at a time, one at a time. And by the way, we've had marijuana town hall meetings. The pro-marijuana people interrupted our town hall meeting so badly, like 3 years ago, that we had meetings just about marijuana legalization. So that was the whole. It'll calm down if I sign it. Yeah. That's a good argument for it, I must tell you. I understand. Let me just say this. I appreciate your point of view on it, and a lot of people do disagree with me on it. And I'm not suggesting that I believe that I'm right, but I'm not suggesting that I have the only opinion on it. I think if we do, and ultimately I think the reality is we'll have some enterprise here. When is the question. And I think we just work with all states to do it right. We don't know about impaired driving. We don't have a test like you do with alcohol. There are lots of different issues. We're not sure. It wouldn't be allowed for children, but children would get their hands on it, and it's like alcohol. We need another alcohol thing. Go ahead.
One more thing about your economics with that, because the state auditor, you said that you have a deficit of about $100 million or so. Right?
Well,
we could close that gap. We could certainly close that gap based upon the numbers and the taxation and legalization with cannabis. I believe it's over $70 million that it would inject into our state.
Well, we've been trying to reduce our cigarette tax by raising it so that less people would smoke. So I'm not really a fan of so-called sin taxes. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Christina Lynn. I'm from Delaware City. Initially, I did come to talk about that particular green issue, but I'm not going to.
Thank you.
Except for to say one thing, and then I do have, I wrote notes, so I have on what you have already presented. So I do want to say that I have a great nephew in Colorado who suffers from NF and a severe seizure disorder. And he is on a marijuana therapy, and it is helpful.
And I support that.
And he was not expected to live much past a very young age, and he's now 15. So that's all I want to say about that.
Thank you.
Every day is a blessing with my nephew.
Amen.
But what I do want to bring up is another green issue. You talked about investing in affordable housing, clean water, economic development, and infrastructure. And I didn't write fast enough, so I couldn't write down the next slide before you changed it. And I have down here in my notes, saving our coastline, ? Because you talked about a commitment to investing in our natural heritage. Well, I'm from Delaware City. And granted, the refinery's there, it's been there for 70 years. There's nothing that's going to change that. But my property in Delaware City backs up to protected wetlands. And it's beautiful. I have a very small house. My yard goes back deep, and it goes up towards Dragon Run. And it's beautiful. And I have a certified wildlife certification for my yard. And critters come in and out, and they're more than welcome. And I plant so that they can be there. But what we have going on down there now, and you all know 1,000 acre, the marshland over
1,000
there,
acre marsh.
is just gorgeous. One of the most beautiful natural areas in the whole country. But what we have going on down there now is the development of Fort DuPont. And as of last night, they're going to move forward with 130 stacked townhouses on the coastline. And I keep looking at that, and I'm thinking, Fort DuPont is nearly an island, if it isn't. It may be an island. The canal.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
There's the small canal, and then there's the big canal. So, there's already new housing over there. And now they're going to put 130 more houses there, which means 260 people, means probably 260 minimum cars, extra cars in that small area. And I don't know how the infrastructure can handle that. I don't know how we're not asking for an environmental disaster to happen over there. And I keep hearing this, and this is what I heard last night at our town meeting, was that you got to have more people in order to build the tax base so that you can do more things. But you can't give away, once you give away those natural habitats and those natural coastline areas that are so fragile, you'll never get them back. And then now I hear that they're planning something similar up in the north end of the state, up around Claymont somewhere. It was just a rumor.
I know that area well.
I
It
know.
was an old steel mill, completely polluted. And what they're doing, the steel mill's down. We were just talking to the gentleman here that they've Amtrak has built a new rail station there. And they're cleaning it up, and they're, if I had one of those steelworker jobs, I might feel this way, but that's way better than what was there before, and it's a long time coming. With respect to your project, similar in some ways, not nearly as distasteful as a big steel mill, but it was in pretty bad shape
I know
prior
it was,
to this
but-
redevelopment company being formed and some of these ideas that you talk about. I'm not up on those ideas. I know that we reestablished the board directing that growth
I
and
know.
trying to manage it in such a way that it meets the.
Well, there's been a lot of damage done down there in respect with this RV park that is going to come in.
Across the
There's-
way.
Yeah. There's damage done to the habitat there that is already done. It's done. You can't bring that back unless you let it grow back if they don't come in. But I don't understand how we don't have enough coastline to keep giving it away.
Well, we're not. I mean, we have the Coastal Zone Act, which is pretty strict and restrictive. In fact, we had several industrial sites that were opened up when I first was elected. Nothing really has essentially happened on any of them. We'd like something to happen to clean them up, because as sea rises and that Delaware River and Bay water level comes up, it's just going to wash those contaminants into the water, and that'll be a bad situation unless we're able to have somebody clean it up in the meantime. One of the things that's in the works potentially for the Delaware City refinery is what they're in competition with a whole group of Delaware companies and Pennsylvania and Philadelphia for what's referred to as a hydrogen hub, a clean energy hydrogen hub, which I would probably believe that it would be better than the oil refinery that is there now. Although, if I was working there and making a good
There's not that many
salary,
people working there.
well, yes, there are. I hear from them all the time.
Not as many as we thought there would be. And I used to work for the power company before I retired. And they didn't listen to me when they said they were going to raise that area and take down the old refinery. They didn't listen to me at my job when I said, this is the golden opportunity for our power company to build a wind and solar hub, a clean energy hub. They thought I was being the funny hippie. But anyway, I really hate to see this constant development along the coastlines in the name of economic development.
Well, all the monies that you saw up there were monies that go on to kind of create coastal resiliency in a natural set. Yes, I agree with that. She said someone needs to watch them. We've got, I think, two, maybe. My friend has had his finger up, and I know he wants to give me hell, so let's give him a minute.
No, I'll start off with a positive. I can say thanks for the 9% raise for teachers, because my son and daughter are both teachers.
And you were one too, right?
Yeah, and that's part of my question. For 33 years I was a state employee as a teacher, looking forward to my benefits that I would get when I retire. And I still believe that Medicare is guaranteed to all citizens in this country. A Medicare, and I call it a disadvantage plan, is not Medicare. They offer different
Yes, it
things.
is.
No, that's not what the federal government's talking about right now either. They're for profit. And then the next question, the question I have about all that is, I may be being misled. First of all, there are probably more state workers working than there are retired workers?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay,
actually.
but my
There
question...
are, not counting teachers, there were like 13,000 state workers. How many retirees?
Retirees, without specific, we cover retirees, about 22,000 retirees.
So there are more retirees than there are.
Than there are state workers?
Well, no.
But you
If
gotta
add
count the teachers as state
on,
workers.
There are more.
Okay,
There are
well,
more those working.
I may be misled, so I'm going to ask us. Medicare pays 80%.
I don't know enough about roughly. There's a.
And
we
don't
add-
the active employees and retired employees not on Medicare cost the state 4 times what a retired employee costs?
No. I mean, just think about it this way, and I don't want to be combative, but look, I'm 66 years old now. I'm utilizing health care more than I ever did because I'm getting older. It's very unless you have a a chronic condition or some, particular disease or issue. When you get older, you use more medical services, right? And so retirees, by definition, even healthy retirees, are going to be more costly.
Well,
and we have a whole group of retirees that retire before they're eligible for Medicare, right? And so we're paying the whole boat for those retirees.
well, I was one of those, and that's why I said, why aren't active employees and those that are not on Medicare, you just gave a 9% raise to teachers, why aren't they paying a little more for benefits? You did away with the double
They are.
state shared.
The answer is they are. Yeah. So
Well-
healthcare costs are going up kind of astronomically.
Well, I'm just glad that, my medical situation I had 7 years ago, but I wasn't on Medicare or on this plan, or I might not be here.
Well, my mother's 92 years old, and she just had surgery. My father was a teacher, as you may know, and educator, and so she is a retiree on Medicare and the Medigap, essentially. So the taxpayers cover that gap that you identified. And the question really is, what's the most efficient way to provide quality health care in a way that minimizes the size of that gap? And we can argue. I spent 6 unproductive years in the U.S. Congress, and we argued about this all the time. And the reality is, the Congress is just not able to wrap their arms around the politics to get something meaningful done. And Medicare's insolvency is now, I don't know, somewhere in the end of this decade or early next decade. Interestingly, it was extended, sadly, it was extended because of those who passed away during the pandemic. A higher number of people passed away. They're not going to be on Medicare, so the actuaries extended the life. Look, we all need just I'm not here, we're not here to punish anybody, to take anything away. We're trying to provide you with the best retiree health that anybody has, and you have it, in a way that is economically efficient.
You just said you don't want to take away those of us that are already on Medicare.
See it that way. Yeah, no, I get it. When we're trying to say that, no, there's a misconception about how it's going to be delivered. I get it that it makes you feel uncomfortable because you're going to have to do something differently, and maybe this particular physician is not in the group that you can see. I get all that, and that's why we had a specific program that was put together just for Delaware to address just those questions. So, okay, 2 more. I think I'm going to get to you. You're going to have the last word. But she's from New Jersey. I'm not. She's been bugging Jim all night. She's from New Jersey. I'm kidding. You can have your next question.
I am from New Jersey. Thank you, Governor. So look, I understand that you want to attract business to the state, and I understand that in the past you were concerned with the long-term health and economic impacts of recreational marijuana use as well as serious law enforcement.
I answered this question already.
I know, but I wanted to ask you, are you keeping tabs with Pennsylvania's use, and are you involved with the Rohrer College of Business at Rowan University? They've got a Cannabis Institute. It's a master's level program that's really driving economic development. And as far as the concerns to the youth of Delaware, there is emerging since 2017 information that says that when you legalize, it puts some guardrails around cannabis compared to other scheduled drugs, as far as you're going to a dispensary versus going to buy heroin or crack or something at the same corners. So with, regard to youth And with regard to economic development, I'm having a hard time seeing
Right.
why you're
First of all, I don't
saying
think those are the
no.
facts. I addressed this issue already. I'm
Well,
happy to talk to you
but
offline.
all
We've
of
got other people who have.
the House and the legislature of Pennsylvania have decided, and you keep vetoing it. So with respect to that, Governor, I'm not sure why
I
you're
hear
still
you.
doing this.
Like I said, I answered that question a half hour ago.
Thank you, Governor Carney. So there's a lot of discussion about health care, specifically the high cost of it. And over the past 3 years, there have been some opportunities to save a lot of money keeping people well during the pandemic and also treating early. And our team, the Delaware Medical Freedom Alliance, actually ran about 10 different COVID town halls to bring people awareness to things like prophylaxis, C, D, zinc, stay well, get your vitamin D levels up, and then also early treatment. They're actually, for the past 3 years, there have been very easily obtainable over-the-counter solutions, Pepcid, Zyrtec, aspirin, antibiotics, which, although I know they're not normally used for viruses, they've been very effective at preventing COVID pneumonia. So our team's been providing very cost-effective solutions for people who felt like they're basically disenfranchised by, I'm not going to blame you, but basically the state, the federal government, because there was a very central line of information that was basically be terrified, get tested, but there's nothing you can do other than shots and masks, neither of which proved to be terribly effective, and in addition to that, there are a lot of people suffering from the shots that are being ignored. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but the truth is many physicians are actually terrified to say that someone's issue is being caused by the shots. So my proposal is this. After the big event we've just experienced over the past 3 years, we would love to have a town hall, basically an open discussion, after action discussion report to just kind of talk about what went right, what went wrong, what could be done better, and just kind of figure out the best solution moving forward in case we're presented with such a challenge again.
So we did that after the last one. I'd be happy to do it again as long as I don't have to talk about marijuana. Is that part of it too? No, I'd certainly be open to that. As I said, we did do an after action, I guess, after the first 2 years, but happy to listen to the commission too. Let's know what the Phillies hat is going to be the last one. He and I are.
Hi, John. How are you? Jeff Crosby. 2 things. You mentioned a thing about clean water. I wanted to know what the state is doing for the Army Creek Superfund site, if they're integrally involved in that, because I live right below there, and I know they just put in inspection wells in certain sites, one right next to my house, and I asked the guy, where can I find the answers to this? He goes, you won't be able to. And what's going to be done about it when this contamination eventually comes into our development and down into Delaware City and down, it's going to keep moving.
Well, sure, there's a really long answer to this, so I have to pick up most of it as we let other people go, and you and I can talk about that. I know more than I'd like to about that. I first started working in the Army Creek landfill remediation when I was working for then Senator Biden in 1986. And so you know that they've built a system out there to intercept the groundwater that was leaching out. They put a cap on top of the landfill. It used to be an old landfill, and Delaware Sand and Gravel was just to the east of there, both of which, the plumes on both of which are being controlled by that interceptor system of wells and pumping the water back into the creek. From time to time, and Sean's back there, he's giving me the, oh my God, the Army Creek thing.
I had to bring it up.
So we could talk a lot more about it, but the bottom line is that was the 80s, 40, 50 years, that system has been intercepting that contamination bloom, preventing it from reaching the
Residents.
No, the water company. Artesian
Right.
wells that are just down gradient. And they test the artesian wells to make sure the water's clean coming out of there. So I haven't heard anything new that you're referring to. There have been some blips over the years where they'd see something that would show up in one of the interceptor wells below the ones that actually pump the water back into the pond. So we can get you, we can talk to Sean and get you an answer to that.
And one more thing, as I've retired from state from Ferris a year ago, February, I was working with Ferris with incarcerated kids, and I'm siding with you a little bit on the evils of letting marijuana get out there to everybody else like that, in a sense that it's not controlled right now, and I believe that it doesn't lead to many good things.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
just wanted to tell you that.
one of the things that I have learned, we've done town hall meetings, I've listened to lots of folks on both sides of the issue, is that just about everybody believes that it ought to be regulated in a tighter way, for want of a better term. And so wherever we end up, that ought to be the goal, right? One of the things, in my view, with all the different priorities that we have, with all the challenges of opiate overdoses and the rest, and trying to get our children where they need to be and getting through the pandemic, we've spent, in my view, too much time on this issue. It's time to move on to the next set of challenges, and that's about where we are. I'm sorry, but Mr. Phillies had the last question. You can ask me after we're done. Thank you, everybody, for coming. See you next time.